The Media Impact Trip offered by Whitworth University allows students the opportunity to travel through New York and Washington, D.C. to learn about the media industry. 12 students were led by Professor Jim McPherson and his wife Joanna on a 19-day trip during Jan term. Over the course of the trip, the group met with 19 media organizations and had free time in both locations to explore the city landmarks and tourist attractions. This video documents the visited media organizations, city landmarks, and student reactions while in New York.
What we did today was pretty fascinating because we got to go to a PR firm, which is really cool, and it was a leading PR firm. I mean, they represent companies like Wendy's, Best Buy, Kleenex, Delta, stuff like that. So that was really interesting. And then we got presentations from like 4 of the people that work there that do really diverse things, and got to learn about their specialties and like their backgrounds and stuff, and kind of see like how each part is integral to the company, but how you can do what you love and still, I don't know, like find your niche. And then we got to go to the New York Times and hang out with their graphics director, and that was really interesting because we got to kind of see like the behind the scenes of putting the graphics together and learn about like what makes that happen.
So the first place we went today was called the Amsterdam News, and that is a historic black newspaper, one of the oldest running black newspapers in the U.S. And it was just really interesting to get a different perspective than from what I've kind of grown up with or what I'm used to hearing. I thought it was really interesting that when you walk in the doors of their offices, there's the front page editions of their papers from Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream speech, and then there's 3 Barack Obama editions around his election and inauguration. And it just kind of shows I thought that was a really distinct reminder of the progression that African Americans have made, even just in the last half a century. The second place we went today was Channel 13 News in New York, so they just cover the greater New York area. And it was just really interesting to hear about the broadcasting side from the public television viewpoint, and just what that looks like, both from a communications, public relations standpoint, and from a kind of research standpoint, and talking about viewer ratings and funding, and just how public television is different from a lot of commercial networks and commercial broadcasting.
So today we went to the Smoking Gun, which is kind of like, I don't know, I describe it as kind of like The Onion, but with actual real stuff. They do like everything journalists do, and they just use actual documents to find stories, basically. We met with William Bastone, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Smoking Gun, and he's been there since pretty much from the beginning. And they've just evolved like an incredible amount since they've started. They've been pretty much one of the first online publications. I'd say this was probably one of the most interesting places that we've been to, just because it was incredible to see like the transition that they've made, and that it's just something that they do for fun. They don't do it for the money. It started out just as a side project, and then it evolved into an actual publication, which was just really interesting because not a lot of publications do that.
Bloomberg. It's about like stocks and trading and that kind of stuff, and how they're just really global and really are looking for transparency across the networks, and they kind of portray that throughout their entire business, whether it's trading stocks or just in their environment at work. They're really focused on getting everybody else to help everybody out, and just to kind of utilize all the resources that they have. I learned that kind of how to trade stocks. Well, essentially, like, people buy this and then they trade that, and everything has to be done within milliseconds. And it's a really quick-paced kind of lifestyle there that, you step away from your desk and 2 seconds later, some stock is crashing, and, you have to figure out how to help your consumer the best and make sure that you have the best products out there. From what I understood of FAIR is that they are kind of critics of different journals and newspapers and things like that, internet, news, radio, different things along those lines, and they just try to make sure that everything is accurate and fair, fairly portrayed across the networks, just so that one network isn't saying this kind of thing and the other one is saying something totally different. They call people out on a lot of things just to make sure that reporters are doing what their job is actually supposed to be, and how nicely they can get that done.
So the Associated Press is essentially a news organization that covers everything from worldly news to sports to business. And today we had the pleasure of actually attending one of their meetings, their editorial meetings, where they get to meet with not only the people in the New York building, but they had people stationed all over the world. They had a video conference with those people and decided what they want to put into their latest issue. We had a small tour where we got to look around the office and see every single section of the department. So we had the World Department that was divided into North America, and then we had the Latin world, and then we had the rest of the world. Then we went over to things like news and entertainment. We had business, just a New York department, so that was cool to see. And then he gave us a small tour of the video editing bay, kind of, and the radio room, which was really cool. That was my favorite part since I'm interested in broadcasting and all that stuff. ProPublica is an online news source that is very objective in the way they write their things, because they're an investigative journalism. So they basically look at things that are of moral force, as they describe of moral force, which is basically anything that people would look at and say, oh, I think there's something wrong with this, or I think this should be changed, and they bring that to light for the public. Okay. At ProPublica, we met with Mike Webb, who is the director of communications, and he basically talked about what they did, what kind of stories they were working on, how they use objective journalism and what they investigate and why they investigate those things. So we really got to kind of delve deeper than the surface level of what we have read online thus far, and we got to know what kind of things they're working on now and how those things are tangible and how they bring them to the public's attention. So that was really interesting for me.
The first place we went today was called Ogilvy and Mather Public Relations and Advertising. So they're one of the largest, kind of well-respected PR ad agencies in New York. So they have about 2,000 employees. So they have all these different ways that they go about helping clients, like direct media, advertising, PR. The list kind of goes on and on. So they just told us how they go to a client and figure out of all their entire business what's the best strategy to take to help that client with their PR or advertising need. We met with Ogilvy PR specifically, and so we didn't really look at the advertising side as much. Granted, they did tell us about advertising and things like that. Mostly they told us about PR and what that does for them. So we were in a conference room essentially the whole time. They had 3 different representatives kind of from 3 of their different departments at various levels of management. So we got a varied perspective in that respect. Our second trip of the day was to Hoboken, New Jersey to visit John Wiley and Sons Incorporated, and they were the first place we visited that was a publishing company. We'd gone to a lot of journalism places, more specifically with print journalism, things like that up to this point. And so they focus on global education, professional development, and also like scholarly journals and things like that. So they're, I think they said, kind of on the hard academic side of things, publishing like college level textbooks, kind of like scholarly articles, things like that. I think one thing I learned was really just the ins and outs of a publishing company. I mean, we only spent about an hour talking to them, but walking away, I think I have a lot better perspective and understanding of what a publishing company specifically does, how they get clients, how they go through the editing process, essentially the publishing industry as a whole.
Well, the Columbia Journalism Review is basically kind of like a magazine for reporters, more or less. They publish media criticism, so they look at the goings-on in the media industry and talk about like the good and the bad and the issues that are happening in the industry. We talked about with the executive editor, we met with the executive editor at the Columbia Journalism Review, and he talked about kind of how his team puts together the magazine and also the online edition, and how they respond to current happenings in the news industry, and do that in kind of a breaking way online, and then in more of an in-depth fashion in the magazine.